And welcome to the Kentucky Watershed Academy. I'm Steve Evans with the Kentucky Water Resources Research Institute, and in this presentation we'll be looking at creating the message as part of our series on effective communication. In this series we've been walking through the steps of developing a watershed outreach campaign. In this presentation we'll be focusing on step 3, creating the message. You might remember from the overview, this is where you get to be creative and use the information you've gathered to create your message, or likely your message is. It's time to prompt the knowledge, attitudes, and actions that will help you to achieve water quality objectives. Begin by reflecting on your water quality objectives. And then, when developing your related messages, be clear and specific. Engage your audience. Make sure you do this by connecting with their values and appealing to them on their own terms. In many cases, you'll need to begin by building awareness of the issue before you can advocate of the action. And prompt a response by providing clear, specific actions that the audience member can take. In thinking about crafting your message, it's important to think for a moment about what makes people care, really about anything. This quote from Maya Angelou is a powerful one. The things that stay with you are the ones that make you feel in a deep way, or something that connects with feelings that you already have. We react emotionally before we act logically. Think about it. As your body develops, it must take the different stimuli from the environment and begin to prepare for action or reaction, and this begins before we even know how to speak. Our feelings have much more to do with how we behave than perhaps we would like to admit. Much of what we're going to discuss today has come from a great paper from the Stanford Social Innovation Review by Cristiano and Nyman. They list 5 principles for more effective communications. We will use these 5 principles as an outline for how to create better messages. These principles are joining the community, communicating in images, invoking emotions with intention, creating meaningful calls to action, and telling better stories. First, join the community. Here is how they summarize this action. Identify a group whose change in behavior could make a profound difference for your issue or inspires others to take action, and figure out how to bring that group value. Joining the community means joining the conversation. Think about how you might consider joining the conversation at a social outing. Likely you listen to what other people are talking about and you try to add to the conversation in a meaningful way. You're seeking to provide a gift to others by sharing something meaningful or learning about what is meaningful to them. It would be awkward to enter a social gathering and to shout your demands to the group at large. This is not respecting the existing conversation. Megaphones are reserved for when the conversation is broken down. There is a time for such messaging, but it's typically when other conversation avenues have been exhausted. So whether you're entering into an individual conversation or putting up a billboard for public dialogue, remember that you are seeking to join the community and the conversation to provide a gift of how the world can be made better. Second, communicate in images. If you've ever taken a memory improvement class, they probably taught you to use your other senses to help move items from short-term memory to long-term memory. This is because our brains store memory better when they involve other areas of the brain. The human mind can only store 3 to 5 pieces of information in working memory at a time. The old proverb, a picture is worth 1,000 words, is scientifically true, at least in principle. Visual language helps to connect, but may not become naturally to those who are trained to write technical science reports, where that language is often excluded. Using visual language to communicate helps your message to remember, so think about the image you are placing in people's brains. Perhaps you can draw a picture of the images that your metaphors are creating. What types of long-term impressions are you communicating? Begin to explore the use of visual sensory words in your writing and in your communications. Water professionals are notorious for using words, terms, and acronyms that the general public is not familiar with and likely does not understand. In your communications, it's imperative that you try to tone down this use of jargon and ensure that you are using vocabulary that successfully communicates your message. Because your brain storage is limited, by using jargon and acronyms, even when you explain them, people may become lost and may not be able to follow you because they are still trying to remember what the word means or they may have already forgotten. All that takes up valuable short term memory. Further, make sure you speak in a language that's familiar to your audience. Scientific discipline specific language might as well be a foreign language to outside audiences. Here are some instances in which scientific words mean something very different to scientists versus the general public. For instance, when we talk about bias from a scientific perspective, we're speaking of an offset from an observation. But in the public's view, we use the word bias, it comes across as distortion or a political motive. Or if we say error, the public views that as a mistake or something that's wrong rather than a difference from the exact true motive. Making sure we use clearer language is extremely important. The Water Words That Work organization was formed after a presentation by this name was given in a river network, River Rally in Virginia in 2004. Uh, this became a blog and then a one-person business and then a small organization that provides individualized assistance on water communications. The basic premise of that initial presentation was that there are key words that will be better understood and more effective at communicating your message than others. Here are a few examples of water specific jargon. You think of best management practices, something we use all the time. That could be better translated as conservation activities. Or we say degraded, well, that can come across as ashamed or made less, but maybe worsened health would better communicate. Or native species, instead we could use naturally occurring. This is the idea of some of the jargon that we use or professional terms that can be communicated in other ways. When considering the language and the way that we appeal to the audience and connect with them, you may consider using a hook, a way to draw them in. For instance, a technical audience might respond to charts and graphs. The developing community of businesses, or just the business community, or perhaps local officials, may be approached best with cost and effectiveness measures. And you may reach a more general audience best with emotional connections, humor, lightheartedness, or using story. This is an example of a car washing ad from the EPA toolbox. Beware of exaggerating, as that may backfire on you, and make sure you only use trusted sources in your communication. As an example of communicating in images, the Lexington Fayette Urban County government conducted a focus group study with different messages directed at picking up dog waste. The survey question was asked, of these messages, choose which one you think is best. Which one do you think is best? The focus group rated each of these on a scale from 0 to 10 in terms of useful information, clear message, and motivation. They also voted on which one they thought was best and described the scores. From best to worst, the scores were number 2 at a score of 8.44 out of 10. Number 3, do your duty, with a score of 6.39. Number 1, pet waste thank you, with a 6.17 overall. Number 5, do your duty with a leash at 6.06, slightly lower. And number 4, picking up after your dog at 4.06. The number 2, the top rated one response, had a comment that says, clear message, dog looks sad, I would pick it up. Pollution message, gross image. This helps to demonstrate the power of communicating by images and even the specifics such as which dog to use. The third principle of effective communication is intentionally invoking emotions. This means thinking about the way in which your communications make people feel. The authors say, think about what you're trying to get people to do and how they would feel if they were doing it. Then think about stories that would make them feel that way. You want to frame your message in a way that relates to the people's values, context, anecdotes, and stereotypes. Try to find ways to make the concept fit into something that they already understand and that they want or like. In their article, Cristiano and Neiman address 3 of the strongest emotions that are often used with messaging. First is sadness or feeling bad. They say relying on sadness as a way to pull on heartstrings may actually result in your community tuning you out entirely. People tend to avoid or remain unmoved by stories and situations that attempt to make them feel bad. Research tells us that people are really good at avoiding information for three reasons. It makes them feel bad, it obligates them to do something they do not want to do, or it threatens their identity, values, and worldview. Another commonly used emotion is wonder or connectedness. Although people avoid information that makes them feel bad, they are attracted to things associated with pleasant emotions. For example, awe, the feeling of wonder that comes from seeing a brilliant landscape or sunset. It opens us up to connecting with others because we feel smaller and more connected to other humans. The last emotion they speak to is pride. Pride can be exceptionally powerful. Researchers have found that people anticipating pride in helping the environment were more likely to take positive actions than those anticipating guilt for having failed to do so. How is your message connecting to these emotions? This image shows a map that's created by researchers in Finland who had 700 participants describe the increased or decreased sensations that were felt as a result of emotional words, stories, videos, or images with these various emotions. What this shows is that the message physically affects the body. Think about how and where you feel these emotions. Your message is creating a physical response in your audience. What effects do you desire your message to create in others? When crafting your message, trying to appeal to motivations may increase the likelihood of people adopting the targeted actions. Again, think about your specific audience and think about what they value and try to connect with that. Savings, time savings, convenience, health, regulatory compliance, award recognitions. These are all things that can use to appeal to your audience. The fourth principle is creating meaningful calls to action. Here is the quote listing the three essential elements of a meaningful call. Review your calls to action to make sure that they ask communities to do something specific that will connect them to the cause and that they know how to do. Researchers in social psychology did a series of experiments which showed that specific, concrete instructions for socially beneficial behaviors actually maximized the amount of happiness that people had from engaging in those behaviors. Specific tasks that people know how to do are the key. How did they do this? Well, among other experiments, they used two groups. They were given 24 hours and they were asked to either support environmental sustainability, that was one group, and the other group was asked to increase the amount of materials or resources that are recycled or reused. The 70 participants had 24 hours to complete these tasks. In a follow-up study, the researchers assessed how happy the participants were with their action. The participants who had the concrete goal of increasing resources for recycling reported greater happiness. This is in spite of the fact that both sets of people ended up doing about the same types of actions. The improved happiness came because of the expectations of the participants and the reality of what occurred and their reality of what they thought they would do were similar to what they actually did. They weren't let down about what they ended up doing. So you can add happiness to people's lives by giving them clear instructions about what they need to do. This takes the weight of figuring out what should be done off of the audience and on to the message creator. The better you do your job, the more satisfied they will feel because you helped them to make the world a better place. Cristiano and Neiman also address the need for obvious connectedness between the action and the cause of the problem in social psychological research. Quote, when people feel as though their actions will not make a difference, they are less likely to take action. The negative feelings outweigh any positive feelings they may have had from the action. The researchers refer to this as pseudo-efficacy. Quote, if people believe they have no power to produce results, they will not attempt to make things happen. End quote. If you set your goals too high, you might lose the battle before you can start because people won't try and think that unless they think they can have some level of success. And if they don't see how the action is related to the cause, they won't even attempt it. Third, they need to know how to do it. And not just conceptually, but actually incorporating whatever this action is into their daily routine. A person can know everything about how to treat invasive species along a riparian zone, but until they can figure out how to incorporate it into their schedule, they're not going to take any action. Most people operate within set boundaries and habits. Sometimes you need to show how the action can be taken without a lot of extra inconvenience. Our last principle is telling stories rather than providing messages. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have plot and conflict and resolution. All these need to be there. If you don't have them, it's not a story. People remember stories 22 times better than facts. People can connect with stories and then relate those stories to others. In a previous presentation, we mentioned that trust is typically based on perceived competence and warmth. Because doctors are often less warm, nurses are more trusted. Similarly, scientists are often respected because of their expertise, but are not trusted because they are not warm. Storytelling is a way for scientists to communicate their message in a way that will increase their trust. You may not be much of a storyteller, but you can get better with practice. I've provided a link to a paper that describes a workshop that helps scientists move through a cycle of learning, implementing what they learned, practicing in front of peers, and then in front of the target audience. Then getting feedback on the storytelling and thinking about the way that you can improve. The important part is that you start somewhere and begin to practice to get better. One of the things you can do to decide whether you have a story is to plot the fortune of the characters in your story between prosperity and despair. Any story can be plotted in this way, whether it's Cinderella or Harry Potter, to show that one, the fortunes of the main character change as a result of the major problem they face, and two, the story nearly always ends with a resolution to the problem, typically resulting in good fortune for the main character. If there is no change in fortune, as shown in A, if there's no drama, then it is not a story. Some stories have greater relevance than others for storytelling. In B, we see the arc of a discovery story. The listener invests into our well-being as we take them on a journey through the successes and failures of our experiments, the analysis, or the field experiences. This process builds tension and expectations as we move closer to a discovery. That's what we're highlighting. The key to this type of story is the result of these experiences. Our discovery is unexpected, and it increases our overall understanding of the ways in which we could not have imagined at the outset. So you could do this in watershed planning. You looked into the problem, you didn't know what it was. This is what you thought along the way, and this is what you found out. So, how did you learn? What were the setbacks? You can phrase it in those ways. How did the stakeholders react to your explanations? How did teamwork help to overcome? All of these are part of that overarching story that helps people connect. You can also use a rescue story. The key to this story's progression is that the audience steps into the story at a high point in the character's fortunes, and they then experience a traumatic loss, followed by a recovery aided by science as the story unfolds. This could be used for perhaps someone that buys a piece of land that's impacted by pollution and then is restored to great habitat conditions. Think of this as a BMP success story. You can also use mystery. Often phenomena that occur in nature, we can't readily explain them, and there's much at stake for society because we don't understand why or how. And so this is part of what drives science, is the desire to solve mysteries and uncover a new understanding of the world. And so it leaves us at this high point. So this is when you are still in the researching your area. What do you know? What mystery still remains? How can people help you get on board to solve that mystery? All these are great stories that you can use in communicating and connecting with your audience in watershed management. Another lesson that scientists need to understand about communication is that no one outside of scientists bury the lead. Read a news article as opposed to a science journal, and the news will tell you everything that you need to know in the first paragraph or two, and some of the background is buried deep in the article. They know that people tune out very easily. So unless you're communicating to a scientific audience or developing a mystery story, for example, beware of following the background, methods, results format. Don't bury the lead. Here are some tips on writing a story. 1. Identify your take-home message first. Think about the so what and why the audience would care. 2. Remember the shape of your story. 3. Consider the sale and timing of your story. 4. Use vivid language. 5. Get feedback, pause, reflect, try again. And 6. uh, Experience that discomfort with telling that story, but become transformed as you tell it again and again and again. So this completes our overview of the 5 principles for more effective communication. Hopefully I've left you with some images in your mind related to each of those principles. Joining the community. Are you joining the conversation like as a social outing, or are you picking up a megaphone? Communicating in image. How vivid are your descriptions of the things that you're talking about? Remember, an image is worth 1,000 words. Evoking emotions with attention. See how people physically react to the emotions that are communicated. Create meaningful calls to action. Remember the science. You can make people feel happy by doing the work of being clear and meaningful actions that you are asking for. And finally, tell better stories. Make sure that your story has an arc, a beginning, a middle, and the end. At this point in time, I want to transition to talk a little bit about what people think or feel when they see or they hear your brand. Branding can affect the level of trust and the likelihood that the message is accepted and spreads through social diffusion. A brand is a trademark, a name, a phrase, a logo, or design that's used by an organization. But it can also just be a behavior that a group is focusing on or addressing. It could be a mascot. You can see some of these ads are their own brand. When we think about brands, we tend to just think of a logo, but the brand should extend across all of your communications. Consistency is the key. It should include logos, as well as variations of when to use the logos and when not to use them. In other words, instructions on what's an acceptable use of the different logos. There could be a core color palette themes, not just fonts, although fonts are included, but the hierarchy of fonts as well. What's a heading? What's text? So the styles and the sizes. All forms, reports, presentations, letterheads, business cards, etc. should have a consistent look. In some cases, you might need guidance on what types of images to use. Maybe you're going for a simple, clean look or a more cartoony look, for example. Finally, you might need some statements about the tone or voice of the communications. How are you looking to be viewed? Are you going for a professional or formal type approach, or a casual and humorous type approach? Are you going for playful and fun? What is appropriate and what is not in your communications? An example of an organization that has been going through a rebranding process is the Clean Water Professionals of Kentucky and Tennessee. This organization was formerly known as the Kentucky Tennessee Water Environment Association. They realized that water environment did not make sense. What is a water environment? And they referred to everything in terms of wastewater or stormwater or drinking water, which erased the interconnectedness between these resources. Further, the term wastewater gives a connotation to some that the water is worthless or it's not being put to good use. Therefore, cleaning water was emphasized in their terminology, and that include referencing the job sector, the treatment plants, the operators, and how they were named. Here are some examples of the branding materials that are available on their website. You can see consistent messaging, color palettes, uh, the type of fonts that are used here. This is all part of this new branding scheme that they have. You can see the website on the webpage. Please check out their campaign. So all of this material is to help us to fill in this box on our summary spreadsheet, which is the overall message that we're seeking to achieve. However, before we look at that summary message, we want to explore a tool that will help you clarify your message. We want to introduce you to the Compass message box as that tool to help you create your message and tell your story. This tool was developed specifically to help scientists work better to communicate their findings and research, but is a really helpful way of thinking through your message and how it communicates your particular issue. The Compass Science Communications has graciously allowed us to utilize their material, but you can dig deeper using their workbook online as a reference. You can also reach out to them if you are looking for personal coaching through an outreach campaign. They are a nonprofit and they offer that as one of their services. We have provided you with a version of the message box in our outreach campaign development spreadsheet workbook. So why should you use the message box? If you're looking to develop a slogan type material, this may not be the best tool. However, it can help you think through the larger messages so that you can tell your watershed story, talk to leadership, conduct an interview, maybe through a TV or with a particular stakeholder, to do press releases, to work with websites or other types of media, to build out a funding application, or even just to do an elevator pitch when you see part of your target audience in a meeting or something like that. The point is that message box can be a quick way to organize your thoughts and your information so that it's easily accessible and you can pound home the main points without going off on tangents or lesser issues or items that don't speak specifically to your audience. The order in which you go through the elements of a message box doesn't really matter. You can kind of start anywhere, with the exception that you probably should start with the target audience at the top. If you have more than one target audience, you will need more than one message box. This is one of the ways in which you can decide if you have defined your target audience too narrowly. If your message ends up being the same for several of the different groups or target audiences that you have, then perhaps you should consider broadening your target audience. However, if you need to emphasize different aspects, particularly the so what or the solution or solutions area, then you might need to separate out into different message boxes. At this point, we should also note that the audience and the issues sections will likely just be a short phrase or a few words. But for the other sections, you want to have no more than 5 points because remember, short-term memory gets maxed out at just 3 to 5 different items. So likely after looking at the target audience, you're going to move to the issue section to start. Or you may have to come back to this after you worked on some of the other sections. Here you want to have a short phrase that sets up the big picture or the broader context of your message. All the other components of the message box should be able to relate to this issue. This will help you to frame the problem that you are seeking to address. What is the bigger picture of what you're trying to do? You might want to refer back to your project forces, goals, and objectives to determine the issue that you want to focus on, but beware of being overly specific. You want to connect with a national or state level issue, or perhaps keywords that others may do an internet search in order to find the information related to your topic. One way to arrive at your idea for the issue would be to use a word cloud or actually to do some internet searches yourself. Some of the examples of what you might have for a watershed specific example would be healthy waters for aquatic wildlife, or nutrient pollution, or perhaps clean water, or safe swimming in the creek, or stream monitoring. The problem section is is the area at the top of the message box. You may feel like the issue and the problem overlap, and that's okay. But the problem is going to be the specific slice of the issue that is specific and more focused to your project or your locality. So issue is broader, project is defining it more so. Some examples might be a troubling trend in your data. For instance, perhaps how few streams are able to be monitored for regulatory purpose due to staff limitations when addressing water quality monitoring as your issue. Or perhaps you may deal with the rise of harmful algal blooms or fish kills when addressing a nutrient pollution issue. Or maybe you're speaking to an impact to human or aquatic health. So maybe some children got sick while playing in the creek, and the data showed that the streams are not safe for swimming or wading. Or perhaps the swimming holes are all dried up due to changes in the impervious surface area. Something like that. Maybe the pollution-sensitive aquatic organisms are disappearing from the stream, but when you're dealing with those organisms and aquatic ecology, you may have to work on selling that depending on your audience. Your goal is to help the audience understand why this is a problem and to connect it to them. You may have several points related to the same problem, but beware of having multiple problems listed together. If you have several, try to pick the priority problem and focus on it. Remember, your behavior prioritization and selection process should have helped you to narrow it down so you're focused on one specific issue. Remember that you only have 5 points or less to make here, so be sure to use vivid and communicative imagery and language here. Now we want to look at the so what of the message box. For this element, the target audience is crucial because you need to think of in terms of why that particular audience cares. The illustration shows a prism through which the message is filtered and then individualized by the audience. Let's look at some of these examples. So the same message is going to be interpreted differently. For instance, a policymaker is going to say, is this support my agenda? What about my constituents? A nonprofit is going to look at their overall agenda and the efforts that they're trying to address. A manager thinks in terms of time, money, effort. A scientist is how does it help their research? How does it fit within the realm of knowledge as it currently exists? A media, hey, does it sell? Will people get clicks? For foundations, they're looking at how to build out their portfolio and who do they support and how does that show, who they are. And then for concerned citizens, it may be affecting their safety, their livelihood, natural resources. The point is that if you're not thinking about that target audience and their end goal, then you're not communicating to why it matters to them. So you see the so what section of the message box is located to the right. And again, here is where your target audience characterization really comes into the play because you're trying to think about 3 to 5 things, the specific reasons that appeal to the things that that target audience cares about. You're explaining that why they should care by appealing to their various motivations. How does it impact them? Your goal in this section is to connect and to resonate and show why this problem matters to them. So this will likely provoke thoughts about how they might be benefited. And some of these benefited items may belong in this section and some may go into the benefits section. If you have overlap between the two, that is fine. The goal is to find and communicate the items that are most important in the end. The solution section is located at the bottom of the form. Here is where you put your proposed solution to the problem. That means the behavior that is to be changed. You might have a few different solutions, but be careful about having more than 3 to 5 points or solutions. Remember, you will increase the happiness of your audience if you make your solutions concrete and easy to carry out. Provide as much clarity as possible. There must be a clear connection between the problem and the solution, so you might need to adjust the problem statement if the solution only addresses a narrower slice of the overall problem. Remember that people will not act if they believe the action does not match the scale of the problem. So here is where you sell why this particular solution will work. And finally, you may want to speak to the barriers that are anticipated during this section and why this approach will work, how you can help them to overcome those barriers. In the benefits section, this is located to the left, you want to list the good things that will be achieved by the action. So in your so what section, you might list, for instance, negative consequences of inaction, while here you list positive benefits. Or in the so what section, you may list specific issues related to that audience, and here you list broader societal good. You want to be careful about overpromising. As you remember, you want your perception of what they're going to be doing to match reality. So are there statistics that show change? Are there case studies that you can reference where this has been done in other areas, or anecdotal stories? You don't want to overqualify your statements of the benefits, but you do want to make sure that the people don't blow you off because you've presented a panacea of what's going to happen. As you move through the message box, it will likely take you several different drafts to improve it to a point where you're comfortable with it. You're not ever really done, but you do get to a point where you're comfortable with it. You may become aware of the need for some statistics in some sections. So depending on the audience, these can help strengthen the argument, but beware of burying people in statistics. Remember to give specific examples and communicate with vivid images, emotions, and metaphor. So you may recognize the need for these. So you may not have those examples on hand, but you can always go and do your research on success stories and perhaps circle back to fit those into these sections. And finally, we want to emphasize that when delivering your message, you may not deliver the message in the same order in which you developed it. If you're doing a TV interview, however, or a press release, this can help you to return again and again to the key messages. On a web page, you can be sure to highlight, again, key items. And in the social media campaigns, you might just release some of these specific points over time in different Twitter tweets or Facebook posts, whatever the case may be. Here we have an example of a target audience was speaking in Durham, North Carolina to the town planners and the local community advocacy groups. And they were seeking to communicate the value of green space and trees to the communities. What they wanted to speak to was, the problem as they saw it was those trees were not evenly distributed, and low income and minority communities were impacted more so by this. Many of the older trees were dying, and there was only so much funding in order to plant uh, new trees. So, what was the so what? They're speaking again to town planners and community advocacy. So they're saying, hey, look, this is disproportionately impacting low income and minority communities with the green space. And trees are a great investment for the health and quality of life, and they can attract businesses to those communities. So the solution would be to plant those trees strategically. Okay, so improve it specifically in these underserved neighborhoods, planting on roadways and hospitals and schools for pollution benefits, and then using native species to replace these dying trees. And then finally, they say, what's the benefit? Well, this will benefit the overall quality of our environmental resources, cool down the neighborhoods, wildlife benefits, aesthetic values. So you can see um, in these different aspects of the plan, they may hit on these in different areas, but in each area they have, less than 5 points, but they're communicating in a very succinct manner how they can approach and address this issue of disproportionality in green spaces in that community. This gives an example that as you think through of how you might approach your specific messaging issue. And so I'd like to encourage you actually to take a few moments to work through this. Um, Process this, and you may want to bring in a group, focus specifically on this item by yourself, and then work with the group to answer these questions and to work through your message box until you're all comfortable with it. Finally, I'd also like for you to take some time to practice your elevator pitch. This may differ from your specific message box, but is the way that you present yourself and what you do on a daily basis. You're always going to have interactions. People are constantly saying, "What do you do?" And so you need to become skilled at telling people, "This is what I do, this is why it matters, and this is why I care," so that you can hook them with an opportunity. You never know where an opportunity may come, and so you may want to have this ready. We hope this has been a helpful workshop for you and that you'll be able to improve your message box skills. Stay tuned for our next episode, which will focus on the packaging and delivering of your messaging. Thank you.